citizens starve, it is no answer to the starving to say that in the sweet by and by, business left to itself will give them a job. Partisans are going around this country scaring parents who are not starving, by telling these parents of an increased national debt which their grandchildren will have to pay. Certainly that is not as alarming as telling parents who are already starving that an untrammeled business setup will provide their grandchildren with food in 1989. And yet that is what the radical gamblers of business and politics might have to say if they were to put their theories into practice in 1941. Not one of you who are good Americans and practical Americans believe that we could repeat the catastrophe of those years immediately preceding and following 1929 and emerge from it all with our economic and social system unchanged. No businessman, big or little, can fairly or patriotically ask his government to take a course of action that runs that risk. And that is why our school of thought, the conservative school, holds the view that an intelligent nation should rest its faith in arithmetic rather than in a hunch. Today, in order to provide customers for business, your government uses government capital to provide jobs, to prevent farm prices from collapsing, and to build up purchasing power when private capital fails to do it. For example, out of every dollar spent by the federal government to provide jobs, more than 50 cents passes over the counters of the retail merchants of America. We also use what we call social legislation, such as legislation to encourage better pay for low-paid labor, and thereby provide more and better customers for you, such as legislation to protect investors so that they may continue to be your customers without losing their savings in worthless stocks and bonds. I wonder if you have any conception of the number of businessmen and bankers and economists whom I talk with briefly or at length in any given month of the year. I wonder if you have any conception of the variety of suggestions and panaceas that they offer to me. I wonder if you know the very large percentage of them who honestly and in good faith and very naturally think of national problems solely in terms of their own business. I wonder if you will be surprised if I tell you that most of them leave my office saying to me, "Why, Mr. President, I didn't know about that. You've given me a new perspective. You've told me new things that are happening, new causes, new effects. I never thought of the problem in that way before." I sit in my office with a businessman who thinks that the surest way to produce customers is to balance the federal budget now, this year. And I say to him, how? Sometimes he says, "How should I know? That's your job." Sometimes he says, "Cut the budget. Cut it straight through, 10% or 20%. And then I take from my desk drawer a fat book, and it's apparent at once from his expression that he's never seen or read the budget of the government of the United States. He tries to change the subject, but I hold him to it. I say this budget isn't all of one piece. It's an aggregate of thousands of items. Either we'll have to cut every item, the 10% or the 20% you ask, or if we don't do this, we'll have to cut some items very much more than 10% or 20%. I point out the $1.5 billion for the Army and Navy. He pounds the desk in patriotic fervor and says, "Don't cut that item, not these days." I show him the item of $1 billion for interest on the public debt. He owns some government bonds, and he rejects any cut in his interest. I show him the $1 billion item for war and civil service pensions, and he says, "No, we couldn't get enough popular support to cut those." I mention the $1 billion for running the permanent functions of the regular government departments, and I tell him that they cost less today for those functions than under my predecessor. And he readily agrees that the postman and the G-man and the Forest Service and the custom people cannot be curtailed. The only people he would sever from the payrolls are the tax collectors. Well, that gets us down to a few other big items, totaling over $4 billion, to take care of four major things: payments to agriculture for the benefit of agriculture, federal public works, including PWA and reclamation and flood control, work relief for the unemployed, including the CCC camps, and assistance for our old people. My visitor agrees with me that we're going through a transitional period, seeking the best way to maintain decent prices for the farm population of America, trying to make them better customers of businessmen, and that even if we have not yet attained the permanent solution, we have got away permanently from 5-cent cotton and 10-cent corn and 30-cent wheat. I come to the public works item. He suggests that that can be cut 50%. I happen to know that his community is working tooth and nail to get a grant for a much-needed new high school, and that his county suffered severe property losses from recent floods. And I suggest that we will start public works economy right there and not give the grants, and that we'll defer building the schoolhouse or the levee or the flood control dam for 20 or 30 years. And in every case, I find just what I had suspected. His local chamber of commerce, his local newspapers are yelling their heads off to have those projects built with federal assistance. And I say to him, "Consistency, thy name is geography."